Before I get started. So my name is Erin. Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. I love to kill trees, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to properly kill trees, but also how to do it safely. But I want you to take this newfound knowledge, and I want you to feel empowered by it, but I also want you to be very safe. I don't want you to leave here today and say, I now know how to fell a tree, and then kill yourself, and then blame it on me. So I don't want that to happen, so just know that this is what it's going to look like. This is kind of a how-to.
All right, you ready?
Ready.
Yeah. We're press and play. I'm getting out of the way.
Okay, this is year 2019, San Francisco. Okay, Mike Pence is president. Brexit, global economy is crashing right here. This is probably New York, but let's pretend that it's San Francisco for the sake of this presentation. And there is a total economy collapse. However, you planned ahead. You knew what life was all about. You have this homestead, and I'm going to tell you, if you want to have homestead life, you need to learn some basic skills, and one of those basic skills is how to properly cut down a tree and do it safely, because you will need wood. Now, historically, cutting down trees was seen as something that was incredibly manly. It was a feat of strength. People used these huge-ass saws, and they did really dangerous stuff, and I don't even know where this was. It was probably in the 1920s, but this was a show of manhood right here. But I'm not going to talk about using regular saws. We're talking about chainsaws here, okay? Yeah. But I want you to know, if you don't know how to use a chainsaw, the same rules can be applied for a traditional saw. If you don't know how to use a traditional saw, you will not survive the apocalypse, okay? I'll tell you right now. But I don't need to tell you right now that things can go very wrong when using a chainsaw. Some people suffer from cock syndrome, which is chainsaw overconfidence syndrome. Raise your hand if you have that in this group. Anyone? Okay, great. So things can go very wrong. Now you might be saying, Erin, how are you qualified to do this? Well, I've dabbled in wildland firefighting a little bit, so I'm not incredibly qualified, but I do like cutting down trees. It is a lot of fun. But another thing I want to point out is you might be saying, Erin, you love trees, you're a naturalist. Don't you want to protect them? I do, but there are some reasons to cut down a tree, such as fire prevention. Maybe that tree over here is just incredibly hazardous. Maybe it needs to be cut down. Maybe you want to live on that homestead and actually saw your own wood, or maybe you just hate trees and you're a really bad person. But whatever your reason is, I want you to do it safely. So let's talk about how to do this safely, okay? So the first step is you're going to want the proper protective equipment. You're going to want to have the headgear. You're going to want to wear a helmet. You're going to want to have eye protection. You'll need gloves. And you'll also want Kevlar chaps. Now, the cool thing about Kevlar is the fibers, once it comes into contact with that chainsaw blade, it actually jams it up so you don't cut your leg. Another thing you can do is identify the entire radius of the tree. So you can back up with your thumb and your pinky all the way back with one eye closed until that tree meets your fingers right here, and where your feet are standing is about how far away that tree is. Now, another thing that you want to do is plan. You need two safety routes. This is the direction the tree is being felled. Within 45 degrees of each other, you want two different escape routes, but you also want to make sure that those escape routes are cleared. You also want somebody watching out for you. If you have a BFF, you want to ask them if they can look up that tree and help you out there, and make sure that you don't have any roots that you can trip on, or when you're limbing that tree. So it's always great to have somebody else watching out. This is where it gets tricky, okay? First thing you want to do, undercut. That's the face cut on the tree right here. That is the direction that the tree is going to fell. Then you want to do about a 72-degree angle. It's going to cut out a notch, just beautiful, just like that. Now the next step is called the back cut or the fell cut. You'll make that cut opposite side the notch with that smooth, seamless cut with your chainsaw and your newfound skill on how to do that back cut. Now the next part gets a little tricky, so just bear with me. Once you get that chainsaw blade in the tree, you'll stick a wedge in on the other side so it doesn't bind on top of that chainsaw blade. And then, once again, you're very skilled, all of you. You'll seamlessly pull that chainsaw blade out. Then you'll take that wedge and the back blunt end of that axe. You're just going to give it a good knock like that, and you'll end up knocking the tree over. Now make sure that you also are 15 feet away from the tree once you knock it over, because it can kick back. There's also some other types of undercuts over here. We just talked about the conventional. The humble cut, that's going to be if you want to keep more of the tree intact. And then the open face cut is going to be if you want to have a little bit more accuracy when you're felling it. You'll all probably want to do that one. Cleaning up when you're limbing. sometimes a tree can fall on a little tree and create something called a spring pull. So to release that tension, the safest way is at the apex right there at the 45-degree angle. So you can make that cut to release that tension. Bucking, everyone say bucking.
Bucking.
Yeah. So bucking is when you're cutting a log once it's on the ground. So one way you can do that is by cutting the top first into that V shape and then cutting it through the bottom. You can also buck a flat log just straight from the top, but avoid cutting into the earth because you don't want to get dirt in your chainsaw. That's just a bummer, okay? And then you always want to stand on the uphill side when you're cutting because, you know, you don't want the log to roll on you. So once again, if you share the same vision of living on a homestead, just wanting to do things for yourself, you might want to learn how to cut down a tree properly, and now you're all experts. So there you go.
Questions. Who would like to ask questions of Erin about this fascinating subject?
I also brought some toilet paper tubes. So if anybody wants to practice, they're welcome to practice. So just to recap, you have your face cut, you have your top notch cut, and then you have your fell cut in the back. And then you just knock. You can also karate kick it if you want, but.
This is something maybe you could do during the other portion of snacking and cutting devices. We've got a couple knives here.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
All right, questions.
Yeah.
I saw a tree being felled once, and as it started to fall, the top half broke off and fell back on top of the people cutting it, who ran away very fast and yelled in fear, as they should.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah. Can you talk about how to identify a dead, rotten tree that would do that to you?
Yeah, that's right. So those are called widow makers, and real thing. But that's also a part of identifying. There's a million safety precautions that I just glazed over. So once again, not comprehensive whatsoever. But yeah, some of the things that you have to identify if there's limbs or a top part of the tree that's hollowed out. Unfortunately, just by looking at the tree, you can't always tell if it's hollowed out on the inside, but a good telltale sign is by looking at the base of the tree to see if it looks healthy as well. But yeah, if it's flimsy up top, it's best to get an expert to do it because even top people are gonna do something dangerous sometimes. Yeah.
How many trees have you cut down, and how long does it usually take?
To cut down a tree?
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, I would be considered a Class A feller, and a Class A feller can cut a tree up to 20 inches in diameter. A Class C feller would be somebody that could like cut a sequoia or a redwood. And so typically, just like little spring pulls or something, you could just do in one stroke. Something that's probably, I don't know, about 15 inches in diameter would probably take about like 10 minutes to cut.
Do you know how many trees you've cut down?
I've probably cut down maybe like 10 or so, 10 or 15.
And is it like if you kill an animal, you like have remorse and you like say thank you for giving life and like you like feel this connection and it's lost?
Well, it's different with wildland firefighting because you're doing like fire prevention, so it's a little bit different. But if I'm true, you're saving people. If I was building a home, and maybe I would feel better. Like, bless you, tree. Thank you so much. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to you said there's a lot of reasons why cutting down trees is good, and you had a bunch of pictures up there?
Oh yeah. Some of the trees, so fire prevention is one of them. So let's say you have to clear a perimeter of a space. It's really important to clear any brush that could allow to give fuel to a fire. Another is like if trees are hazardous, so if they could pose a potential risk for somebody, whether it's around your house or whether it's around people.
Like a widowmaker.
Like widowmaker type trees. Pretty much, yeah, other reasons, forestry. We're in a building that's made out of wood right now, so clearly cutting down trees for that reason. And then once again, if you just love killing trees and you're a bad person, then that's also another reason. But those are pretty much the main reasons, yeah.
Are there different variations of this foundational technique that you set for depending on say the size of the tree or maybe species or any anything else?
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely different types of cuts that you can do for different types of trees. And the rule of thumb is that you should never go, like when you're doing the face cut right in the tree, you should never go more than a third into the tree. So let's say it's a smaller tree, like sometimes your notch is going to be like only about this big, right? But if you're doing like a redwood or a sequoia, then your notch is going to be like maybe a few feet in, and so your strategy is going to be slightly different. But you should never go more than like a third in for that front notch.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any species of trees that you know of that are like invasive, particularly nasty, that extra deserve to be tree murdered?
Oh, let's see here. Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know. I did all of my firefighting in the southeastern United States, so in California, I'm not sure. Maybe eucalyptus.
Yeah.
Oily also.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know if eucalyptus is the type of tree. There's this one invasive species of tree called tree of heaven in Tennessee, and we would try to eradicate it, but what happens is its defense mechanism is to spray its seeds when you start cutting it. So if you actually cut down the tree, it'll probably grow like 10 more trees. So I don't really know how to solve that problem.
Like a parachute over
Right,
it.
I know, like have a net
Put
or
a
something
condom
on
over
top
it.
of
Yeah.
Right?
So does this mean that you have taste in chainsaws?
No, I mean, that's a really good question. Husqvarna. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
If the tree is growing lopsided or leaning, how much of a lean or a lopsidedness can you deal with to make it fall the way you want?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that's another strategy. Like you have to take into consideration if the tree is leaning this way and you want to fell it this way. One way that you can counteract that is by the size of the wedge that you use. And so your notch would be smaller. Like let's say the tree is leaning this way, right? Your notch would be pretty small on this side because you would need the wedge side to prop it up. So there's like, I don't know the math behind it, but there is a formula that's like the amount of lift that you get on the wedge for a certain degree will tilt the tree this way. But a lot could go wrong when you're trying to fell a tree that's leaning in the wrong direction. So I haven't done that. That's like class C. Yeah, that's like a class C person. Yeah.
This is a whole other can of beetle larva, but a lot of trees have died in California and further north because of the beetles in the last few years.
Right.
And I know that some of the logging companies say, oh, well, you have to cut down all those trees for the ecological benefit of the land, blah, 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 blah. What do you think? Is it beneficial in some way to cut down a bunch of trees?
You mean to go back to nature, or so they could repurpose the land, like replant trees?
I don't believe a word
or
of it, so I
something?
can't give you their reasoning. Their rationale doesn't make any sense to me. Do you know any good reason to go in and cut down bunches of trees other than to make a bunch of money because you're a big corporation?
No, I would say that, in my opinion, a dead tree is just as important as a live tree because of the ecological services that it gives back to nature. But I would say that same model doesn't work for an entire ecosystem, right? Like if all the trees in a square mile radius have been affected by this beetle and then you cut them down, then you have erosion and you have like nothing can grow there. So it's not going to benefit that ecosystem, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly the same thing, but I did this forestry workshop, and they talk about forestry management, and that's why you would want to kill a bunch of trees, and that we actually produce more trees than we can use, and that's why there ends up being so much fire danger, because people are like, don't cut down the trees, and then there ends up being all this like really high hot burning fuel, and then it goes for acres and acres, thousands of acres, and kills a bunch of things.
Yeah.
But you have to cut down trees, and it's that people should use the wood that comes from that instead of like teak and things from the rainforest and stuff like that.
And along those lines in the southeast, just like we have the beetles here in the southeast, the woolly adelgid is something that affects the Virginia pines, and it looks like bread mold on the pine needles, and so one of the ways is to actually kill the tree to get rid of it, but it can spread from tree to tree to tree, so they have to eradicate the trees that are infected by it to get rid of that disease on them. And that's
Ju-
one way.
Just to,
question.
Mm-hmm.
oh, but can I respond to something?
Yeah.
Before the last question? One of the interesting discussions we've had up at the Music Creek property is which smaller ones should be removed. How do you decide which smaller ones to remove so that the bigger ones can have more space? And that's basically the consensus is you leave the bigger ones, but not the ones that are near the end of their life anyway. So it's a really interesting, tree by tree analysis of which ones to open up space with so that the other ones can become really productive trees and grow big and become big shade trees and so forth.
Almost kind of like what Lisa was talking about with the thank you chicken for giving your life. Like there's a lot of connection to this stuff.
Last question.
Deep thoughts.
Somebody was
Trip?
asking for it.
Trip.
Oh, I already asked. Do you have any experience with, and can you say anything about non-lethal tree cutting?
Non-lethal tree cutting, like give me an example.
Like pruning?
Pruning. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think that's also a regular part of like seasonality. Like a lot of people prune trees, like in different seasons of the year. I don't really have a lot of experience gardening like that, but I know that that's a regular practice and that there's like a non-fatal way to prune trees. If that.
Okay.
Is that-
you don't
yeah.
know the proper cutting method.
Oh, I do. I do know the proper cutting method. Sorry. When you're cutting a limb, the best way to prune is 3 cuts. So you do 1 cut on the underside that's like about an inch or a half an inch, and then you cut about an inch away from the top side so that limb breaks like that. And then the 3rd cut is going to be at the base of the limb, and that's how to properly do it. So it's like 1, 2, 3. Like
And
that.
will the limb already be off by the time you do the third cut?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the limb is already off when you
And-
do the 3rd cut.
Do you still say timber?
Like
that's kind of an honest question. Is
you
that-
actually no, you do.
Okay.
Yeah, you do.
It's
Yeah.
Well, let's
It's
thank
really important.
the fabulous performance.